Okay, so thank you all for coming. This week's Parsha is Parshat Korach, where we have the archetypal, classical leadership struggle, power, politics, that we just open the paper and you see it every single day in whatever country you want to look at. So we're going to look at a very, very interesting aspect of this parsha. And I should mention that most of the teachings that I'm going to be giving over are coming from this book. It's called Awakening the Spark Within, from Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg. It's called 5 Dynamics of Leadership That Can Change the World. And this book, I worked very closely with Rabbi Ginsburg on this book. So it's very close to my heart. And so in the Parsha, when Korach makes his challenge, so Moshe tries a few times to diffuse the situation. He tries to get Korach to back down, his followers to back down. But not only didn't they back down, but Datan and Aviram, two nemesis of Moshe going way back to Egypt, spoke to him with total disdain and chutzpah. And Moshe saw that the challenge was very formidable. So he said to the people, he said, if God does not create a new creation, and the followers of Korach don't die by some miraculous occurrence, that's proof that God didn't send me. As soon as he said that, quite literally, the earth opened up and swallowed Korach and his followers. So this is an amazing story, a well-known story. And there are many, many, many different things that we could be talking about. But we're going to focus on just one idea here. And that is, where did Moshe get the idea or his own chutzpah to put God on the spot and, in a sense, set up God that he had to create this, like the earth swallowing all the followers of Korach? Where did he get this idea? So I'm going to read you a very mysterious verse in the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. It's the first verse of the 10th chapter. And it says like this: death flies stink, yet they ultimately express fragrant oil. More precious than wisdom, than honor, is a little foolishness. So the first part is very mysterious. Death flies stink, yet they ultimately express fragrant oil. But we're going to concentrate on the second part. More precious than wisdom, than honor, is a little foolishness. So what's called the pshat, the straightforward explanation of what this means is that a person can build up a reputation over a lifetime, and then in one foolish move or saying or action can destroy all that he's built up. In other words, a little foolishness can overwhelm a lifetime of goodness and wisdom and honor. And you see this all the time. Again, just open the papers where you see important politicians writers, artists, sports people, film, whatever you want to say, who have seemingly everything in the world, all of the honor and glory and money, and then they do something stupid, some scandal that they're caught in, and their whole reputation of a lifetime goes down the drain. We see this in the papers almost on a daily level. So that's the simple understanding. Yet the Midrash gives a very, very different understanding, and they read it in the same words, but they read it that sometimes a little foolishness goes farther than wisdom or honor. And they bring a number of examples in the Midrash. And the first one they bring is our story of Moshe asking God to create a new creation. In other words, it bordered on what we would call foolish for a person to, in a sense, demand or set up God to do such a thing. And yet God did it. So that was the first example that they bring, that Moshe tried to placate them. He tried to solve it in a peaceful way, but the people would have no part of it. And so he had to think outside of the box. He had to do something startling. And here it's called, as it were, foolishness. The second example that they bring is an amazing story about David and Melech. One time, David and Melech is speaking to God, and he says, God, you created such an amazing world, but there are two things I don't understand why you created them. Why did you create crazy people? And why did you create spiders? Everyone's afraid of spiders. No one wants them around. Like, what do you need that for? So God answered, by your life, you will need both of these things. So the story is when David is running away from King Saul. So he was boxed in, so he had no choice but to go to what we now call Gaza. And there was a king there, Achish. And one of the guards of Achish was actually one of the co-fighters with Goliath. So David is trying to hide there. And this person sees him and recognizes him. This is the person who killed Goliath. So he goes to the king and he says, I think David is actually here. So the king comes to see. King David sees he's really in a bad situation here. And so the only thing he can do is act in a way that they might think he's not David. So he starts acting like a crazy person. This story is in the book of Shmuel. And he starts drooling and he starts scratching on the walls. And he starts acting like a total crazy person. Now, it turns out that Achish, the king, his wife and some of his daughters were actually clinically insane. And when he saw David, he didn't know it was David, but it was reported that it was David. So he said, I don't have enough crazy people around me now. You bring me another one? Get him out of here. And so they escorted David out of the city, and he escaped. And David actually wrote a psalm about this experience. It's hinted to but it's the 34th Psalm. And we say it every Shabbos morning. It says it's a psalm when David changed his appearance before the king. Yes, someone's asking. It's in the Siddur. It's in Psuki de Zimra every Shabbat. The third example. Oh, and now for the spider. Because remember, God said, you'll need both of these. You're questioning why I would create these two things. So the story is David escapes Saul again, and he is in the caves by En Gedi, and he comes into a cave, and a spider came and made a web in front of the cave. So when King Saul's men were going from cave to cave looking for him, they came upon this cave, which was covered with a spider web. So they said to themselves, well, obviously he can't be in there because the spider web is whole. There's no way he could have gotten in. They didn't realize that he was already in when the spider came and made the web. So here, these are amazing stories, how God, in a sense, proves to David that he would need both of these things. And he had to use foolishness. He acted like he was insane. That's how he was saved. The third case that they bring is also a very famous story of Elijah, the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, when the people of his generation were following idol worship, the Baal. And it was so prevalent that it was truly a bad scene. So Eliyahu comes up with this incredible idea that he's going to create a battle of the gods at Mount Carmel, right near Haifa. And he invites everyone to come, and he sets up a contest that an altar will be made and a sacrifice will be put on the altar. And the one that can bring down fire from heaven, that will prove who the real God is. So there were 450 priests of Baal and just Elijah. Most of the prophets had been killed already by the king and the queen. So all day long, the 450 priests of Baal are trying to bring down fire from heaven to burn up this offering. And they're not succeeding. And Elijah's, in a sense, making fun of them. He says, maybe your God is sleeping. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he can't hear you. And all day long, they try to bring down fire from heaven. Then he said, it's my turn. And it was already late afternoon. So Elijah took water and he poured it on the altar to make it harder. He said a short prayer and fire came down from heaven. And the people were so amazed. They said, Hashem hu ha'elokim. Hashem hu ha'elokim. Now this phrase we use it, it's in the Aleinu prayer that we say 3 times a day. And it's in the closing prayer of Yom Kippur. At the very end of Ne'ilah, so at the pinnacle, Yom Kippur is about to end, and everyone has a second wind, tremendous energy. And we yell out, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, 1 time. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, 3 times. and Hashem Hu HaElokim 7 times. And with that, we finish Ne'ilah. Hashem Hu HaElokim, these are 2 different names of God. And we're testifying that it's all one. It's all one. So all 3 of these stories of Moshe in our Parsha, of David and Eliyahu, are cases that the Midrash brings that a little foolishness is more precious than wisdom and honor. So we're going to now explore this a little bit deeper. And we're going to take, just for a minute, this idea that when David was exhibiting signs of insanity, so he was literally expelled from the land. He was thrown, get him out of here. So Rabbi Ginsburg explains that there's something very archetypal about this. And he explains that if you look at Jewish history, we were spread all over the world for literally 2,000 years, even more than that. We were already in Babylonia 2,500 years ago. The 10 tribes were taken away 2,700 years ago. And so Jews are all over the world. And if we had enough time, we would go through all the expulsions, all of the pogroms, all of the inquisitions, all of the everything that happened to it, the Crusades, and the pinnacle was the Holocaust, where for jealousy, for fear of the other, or fear that Jews were getting too wealthy or too strong, nation after nation, kingdom after kingdom, state after state would force us to move, would expel us. So Rav Ginsburg says the story of David is an archetypal idea of, throughout history, the nations of the world like just couldn't stand us being there, and they threw us out. And this happened just in 1948, when the state of Israel was formed. So in Arab country after Arab country, they quite literally expelled the Jews. The Jews were forced to leave, usually with just a shirt on their backs. They could not take anything with them. And we know that there was the expulsion from Spain. There was expulsions from England, France, Portugal, and like I say, smaller states and kingdoms before we had nation states. But also on a deep, deep level, in many cases, it's not in every case, but a classic or typical Baal Tshuva, someone who's steeped in, we'll call it secular culture, secular lifestyle, secular society. And at a certain point, it's like, this is not the real me. This is not what I want from life. There's something wrong here. I'm not satisfied. I'm frustrated. And many times, a person is led back to Jewish belief and Jewish practice and tradition only when they get to the place of not being able to stand where they're holding right now. And so this is a very, very similar thing. It doesn't happen to every person. There are many people who decide they want to become more religious or more traditional, just from a logical point of view, an intellectual point of view. But many, many, many people come to a dead end spiritually, psychologically. And it's like, just like the nations many times just threw us up out of their lands, that sometimes we have to, in a sense, throw ourselves up in order to be ready for something new. So there's a very, very deep concept. So we want to end with one more connection. There's this idea of a sense of folly. Now, I have to mention that this book, I said in the beginning, is based on what's called 5 dynamics of leadership. And the 5th one is what we're talking about. The other ones are, and of course, we don't have time to really delve into it now, but the first one is called an art of compromise. The second is the drive for wholeness, for vision. The third is the power of compassion to inspire. The fourth is the drive for integration, especially between physical and spiritual, secular knowledge and Torah wisdom. And the 5th is called a sense of folly. So we brought 3 classic cases of folly, but folly, usually we have like a negative connotation to it. But here, folly means either the ability to think out of the box, or in a different state is a sense of joy. Now, what's the connection of folly and joy? So there's a story in the Gemara of one of the sages, Rabbi Shmuel, that if you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, so you know that sometimes at a certain point, you'll have the groom and the bride sitting next to each other, and everyone kind of surrounds them. And people do like acrobatics, people juggle swords, flaming, what is it called? Poi. People stand on their head. All these kind of things. Why? To make the Chatan and the Kala laugh and be happy and joyous, like outside of our usual kind of like staid realities. And this is taken in the Gemara, that this Reb Shmuel used to juggle twigs of myrtle. And one of the sages felt that he was making a fool out of himself. And so when Reb Shmuel passed away, back then there was a tradition that there would, call it magically, appear like a pillar of fire before the body as it was being taken to burial. And so the sage who thought that Reb Shmuel was making a fool out of himself sees this pillar of fire leading to where Reb Shmuel is going to be buried. And then he realized, I judged him incorrectly. It wasn't folly. It was pure joy. And we have the story of David and Melech when he dances the tabernacle up to Jerusalem. Before there was a temple, we had the same Mishkan from the desert. And it moved from place to place. There are many, many stories about this in the book of Shoftim, book of Shmuel. And on one occasion, David is moving it to Jerusalem. And he's dancing like crazy, full throttle. And his wife, Michal, is watching him from her balcony. And she feels he's making a fool out of himself. And when David comes home, she rebuked him. And he said to her, you misunderstand completely. While I was doing this, it was all for God. It was all for the honor of the Torah. But in my own eyes, va'ayiti shafel be'einai, in my own eyes, I was very humble. And if I could have been, I would have been more humble. And interesting enough, it says after they said, and Michal never gave birth after that. She never succeeded to giving birth. So the idea was, in a sense, that she was so closed up, she wasn't open to be able to give birth. There's another story of the famous sage Rabbi in the 3rd century, that he would open all of his discourses with a humorous story or a saying in order to get everyone to laugh. And then he would give over his discourse. So what was the point of it? That he wanted to get people to relax, to be open to what he was going to say. And so he would tell a humorous anecdote. Today, you see, this has been adopted by like so many different rabbis, that some have even taken it to the extreme where it borders on a stand-up comedy until they get to what the point they want to say. I'm not putting it down, because it is very entertaining, and it does open people up to when the rabbi is ready to like hit them with what he wants to impart to them. People are open to it. So this is going back quite literally like 1700 years to Rabbah. And one other example that I want to bring is what's called Simcha Beit Shoeva. These were the incredible celebrations that took place in the temple during Sukkot. They happened every day during Sukkot. That's when we went down and we drew water from the Mei Shiloach, the water source for Jerusalem, and they brought up a vessel full of water. And in the morning, they poured it on the altar as a symbol of our prayer for rain in the upcoming winter season. And the statement in the Mishnah is, anyone who has not seen the celebrations of Simcha Beit Shoeva have never seen joy in their life. And it's described how the sages would dance and with wild abandon and do all kinds of acrobatics and juggling. And it says there were more instruments than a person could count, and that they lit this huge menorah. And it said there wasn't a house in Jerusalem that wasn't lit up by the light that was emanating from the temple. And this was called the epitome of joy. But again, in all of these cases, it wasn't just, how do you put it? Just joy didn't just happen. It's when people opened themselves up to joy, and in many cases went beyond their usual way of doing things. I'll share a story with you. And I saw it in action. When we moved to Denver, so this was in 1988, and we became regional directors of NCSY, and we were starting a new region. So when we had our first event, it was called a sukkah hop, where we went from sukkah to sukkah, and in each sukkah we ate different things, and we had different games and plays. These were for teenagers. And so we were new to the community, and it was a new youth group. And so the first event, we had 25 or 30 kids, and we were very happy about it. But they came from different places. Not everyone knew each other. And so we gathered at this one sukkah, and like there was like, we call it tension was in the air. Just no one knew what to do exactly. And here I'm like new on the scene, and I myself, like for a few minutes was like, well, how do I break the ice here? I'm not exactly sure how to break the ice. So I looked around, and you know that on sukkahs, we hang all kinds of decorations on the walls and from the schach, from the top of the sukkah. So there was a box there. They had decorated the sukkah, but there was a box there with all these plastic vegetables and fruits that could have been hung as decorations. So in my like desperation to do something, I started taking these and throwing them at the kids. Now they're teenagers. So they thought this was great fun. So everyone starts throwing these plastic vegetables at each other, and it broke the ice. That's why I'm telling the story, is because I had to think literally outside the box, and I did something like totally spontaneous, and it was a bit foolish. It could have bombed totally. People could have thought like, what's this guy doing? So, but it worked. So that's the idea here, that sometimes a little foolishness, sometimes thinking outside of the box, sometimes doing something to bring ourselves joy and humor that we usually wouldn't do, it's a great boon for the psyche. So I just want to end very quickly that if you take the letters of the word Mashiach, the Messiah, Mashiach, and you permute the letters differently, it comes out Yismach. He will be joyous, or he will be the one to bring joy. And so the idea of Mashiach, we have all kinds of ideas of Mashiach, but one of the most important is that he will bring a type of joy that many of us struggle to reach. We all want to be happy. We all want to be joyous, but the way of the world is, it's not always so easy. It's not always easy to let your defenses down and allow yourself to laugh or to be full of joy. You know, there's no word for fun per se in Hebrew, but there are many words for joy, many, many words for joy. So we'll end with a blessing that when needed, we have the capability of thinking outside of the box, that we can open ourselves up to true joy, and then to share that joy with others.